welcome poultry industry. I'm Al Dam, your provincial poultry specialist with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So tonight's update for all of you that are listening is brought to you with the help of a lot of folks on here. So thank you to CFIA and OMAFRA. We have Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, some folks sitting on the line from Canadian Wildlife Services. So there's, and of course, Poultry Industry Council. I'd like to thank the Poultry Industry Council for helping us today pull this Zoom meeting off. So tonight is going to be the commercial poultry update based on the situations we have in Ontario right now with high path H5N1. For those of you that may be in the small flock side of things, there will be another small flock meeting that will be done tomorrow night, same time. The information, this event will be recorded. It will also be posted on the PIC website. If you have any questions for tonight, that will go under the Q&As. So yeah, the Q&A is open. We've disabled the chat, the video, and the microphones. I'd like you, for your questions, to be respectful. There is one strike and you're out. So if anyone says anything untoward in Q&A, you're gone, and you're welcome to look at the recording tomorrow or whenever we get it posted on the PIC website. So I still see our number is still slowly cycling up. I think we're at 418 here at 632. So with that, let's just start the show. So first off, I'd like to bring up Greg Robinson. So Greg Robinson is the industry liaison with Canadian Food Inspection Agency. He's gonna walk through our current high path AI response and a lot of other things. So Greg, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Hey, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to come today and give you at least a summary of what's going on from the CFIA perspective here. I won't be able to answer all the questions, but we also do have Sandra Stevens that'll join a little bit later from CFIA that'll go through a bit of a what you can expect presentation. So hopefully that's helpful as well. So I'll give a quick summary of the events to date. I'll start by confirming that I'm the CFIA industry liaison on our Ontario Animal Health Emergency Response Team. That's the way that we tackle these challenges at CFIA. We have an emergency response team that uses an incident command structure, 80 strong or so, that's trained and ready to respond to these events. So we launched that structure on Saturday following the first confirmation of high path AI in Ontario. So site work has continued has started on Saturday at a site in Guelph-Aramasa Township that I'll refer from here to it as Infected Premise 1 or IP1. Surveillance testing has already begun at producers that surround in close proximity to IP1. And we've also successfully today reached out to a few producers with a notice of quarantine within that proximity to IP1. Further contact of producers continues as we speak and will continue into tomorrow. The prioritization that we use for that is really proximity to the infected premise. So we start at the closest to the infected premise, and then we move ourself outwards to that. In support of that, we have initiated that contact number that I alluded to earlier for those that are either in that proximity and have to move products out, or for anyone requiring movements of products into that proximity. So I'll give it out now. And I think the request, though, is really to be mindful and respectful that priority should be given to those that have imminent movements either in or out of the proximity to that site. So We're calling it our movement control call-in line. And I'll put this all in the chat as well so that everybody's got the information there. I'll commit to doing that before this is over. But the number is 519-953-6658. The line will be monitored beginning tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. until approximately 6 p.m., 7 days a week. So please call that movement control line if you have questions in terms of movements of poultry and poultry products within that proximity. If there's any required testing based on those movement requirements and permitting, that will all be coordinated through that movement control line. So it's kind of the one-stop place to call, and we can set up any of the required testing that needs to be done in support of that. As well, there will be a functionality to leave messaged, and our commitment is to call back within 1 day. So we'll certainly aim to do that. And again, that line will open up tomorrow morning. So I can also confirm that we have started on-site response efforts at a secondary site that was confirmed as high path positive yesterday in Zora Township, and I'll refer to it as IP2 from here on in. I can confirm that we are underway looking at any high-risk movements and compiling the list of poultry-related premises in the surrounding area. So we'll follow up the same as in IP2 with those with closest proximity and then work our way out. We are working with embedded industry personnel as well to prioritize those movements in and out of the zone to identify any of those real high risk movements and things there. So the other thing that we're doing in the response to this is responding to all sick bird calls that we've received to date. We will continue to respond to those calls, and where epidemiological links are seen, then we will perform sampling to confirm the presence of AI. We've set up a separate line that we're calling our surveillance and diagnostic call-in line. The number on that one is 226-217-8022. Again, I'll put this all in the chat. That one's our surveillance diagnostic line. If you have any concerns about health of flock, questions around testing, that is the line to call. And again, that'll be live tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. While we're suggesting a 6 o'clock, we encourage calls at any time on that line, especially in response to sick birds. Just a quick note on compensation to confirm that CFIA compensation is triggered by a notice of destruction. So it's only in very small instances where CFIA provides the compensation. It's related directly to those notices of destruction. I'll focus on biosecurity habits. Please keep up your diligent efforts to contain the disease, prevent farm-to-farm transmission. I know we're going to hear about wild bird risks and things of that nature. So really just providing the support towards that. So that's really a summary of the CFIA focus and efforts at this time on the ground from those of us that are involved directly in the response. I'm sure there's still a lot of unanswered questions as we determine the outer limits of the zones and exactly who's impacted at this point, but those will become clearer over the next few days. So please, we ask for your patience on that as well as we work through and confirm those zones and all of the implicated producers. We will continue to update the website, so it's sort of the best place to go to get updated information on additional sites, or just even there's a lot of good background information, and I'll include that into the chat as well. So that's it in terms of that, but thanks for the opportunity for the update. I can confirm that FBCC will be coordinating some future industry calls, and we'll be setting those up in the near future where I'll come on an ongoing basis and give everyone an update of exactly where we are in the same kind of status.
Right, and so I'm just looking at the questions here, Dan. We got a question from Dan For you, Greg, just zones are based on maps attached to email sent out. So I'm assuming that was the FBCC one, or a 10-kilometer radius, or how do you establish the zones?
It's a really good question. So the FBCC map is essentially a preliminary zone that FBCC puts in place. We are in the process of confirming the actual zone. So there's a lot of different things that go into place in determining the, I'll call it the outer limits of that zone. You know, the inner limits are fairly clear, and that's why we can get moving right away in those close proximities. We're still in the process of confirming the outer limits of that. So that's something that will be communicated at its endpoint on the website. Still need a couple of days to do that for IP1 and IP2. And of course, it also allows a couple of days to really look to see if there's any other high risk movements that would either expand that beyond a 10K or not. So lots of things that'll go onto that. There'll be future communication on that, but that outer limits on that zone have not yet been decided. It's also in consultation with our trading partners, because ultimately that's the route to reopening trade around respecting of those zones as the disease control efforts, in which, everything outside the zone, that we can have confidence towards AI-free status outside the zone while we set those. So that's a rather long answer, but it's a very complicated question and something that we still need a couple of days to really formalize.
Right on. Okay, the questions are coming in now. Without zone currently affected producers expected to contact industry partners. So are producers going to contact partners like feed, hatchery, processing, or will Featherboard Command Center be organizing that? I'm not sure if is that a question for you, Greg, or I guess I'm just looking at the Q&As that are here that you can see. So
without zones, are currently paper producers expected to contact industry partners? So yeah, that certainly is a good question. I think it's an all effort, everyone on deck here in terms of really spreading the requirements. Ultimately, the permitting requirements will affect all of those sectors. So we'll all do our part, I would suggest, to spread the word once the finalized zones are there, to really spread that word.
Great. Next question, and actually just an aside, I'm already getting some notes on the site here that looks like we've reached capacity on the Zoom call. Some folks have been kicked off and can't get back in again, so this will be recorded. If anyone has had someone trying to get on and can't, yeah, unfortunately, we were more successful at getting this message out than we expected, so there will be the recording that we'll have set up fairly quickly. Let's see, what was the next question here? We had shelled pickups. Want to answer that one, Greg? For shell egg pickups, there will be a requirement for CFIA to swab each flock within the zone prior to every egg pickup, or would this be weekly? Or I guess it's just a general question about how we move eggs out of the zone.
I will admit that I'll avoid sort of discussion on each specific scenario and each specific group. That permitting group, if you are within that proximity, please call that line. They will walk you through those requirements as part of that permitting process. So I'll avoid sort of answering any of those specific questions, but just encourage to talk to that permitting line. They're available tomorrow and ready to answer all of those questions that you've got.
Great. Let's see. You kind of already answered the question about how long it will take to establish the zone. Is this going to be detrimental for trade of poultry products? I guess that's more a question of our trading partners, right?
Yeah, I think you could look at this either way. Essentially, the determination of the zone is the piece that's needed. However, those conversations start immediately. So ultimately, everything's being done to determine that zone as quickly as we can in consultation with our trading partners. So yeah, moving as fast as we can.
Yep. Another question about swabbing farms inside the zone or receiving a permit to ship product out. I guess that goes back. Does that go back to calling the move line? Or
Absolutely. If that's a producer that's within that, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. Another question. How close is CFIA about the decision to depopulate the entire farms? So this is a bit of a process of what happens when you're considered positive, I guess. There's the depopulate, how long does it take, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, those are decisions that are currently ongoing. So yeah, in terms of, depopulate entire partial, export is considered as a part of all of those. So those conversations continue. I can confirm that.
Question about supplies for PPE. Who will provide that for producers? It's not you, correct?
No, that's right.
Okay. Let's see. Can we share a type of bird positive head counts on site? Clinical signs noticed by the farm team. Is that a privacy issue, or what are you allowed to share on that, Greg?
Yeah, we really do like to keep these things. It's a respect of privacy at that point. So I'll stick with the media lines on this one.
Okay. Good government answer. Next question is actually a bit of an interesting one. It's something we've been talking about a lot lately. So we have a question from organic inspector. So how will high path AI infect organic poultry farmers? If they're expected to let their chickens be outdoor, weather permitting, how long do you expect the situation to be over? So do you want to take a stab at this one? I'll throw my thoughts in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, either way, really the first thing we have to do is control the disease, and then there is a 90-day surveillance period to that. So there's a number of efforts here yet to, first of all, control the disease, and then there'll be the surveillance period as well. So it's a number of months thing, not a number of weeks thing, is I guess what I could say.
And I think on top of it too, when you look at high risk periods, right? Spring migration is when our highest risk is. Brian Stevens will get into that. As far as how long we can expect migration last, that's going to be your high risk period. That's going to be a developing thing as we go, because we've never dealt with anything like this. Like the 2015 experience that some of us remember is similar but different. This is a different disease. This is a different etaology. This is affecting birds differently. Another question: permits are needed for transport activities linked to the zones. Would permits be needed within, in or out, or through the zone? So there's a
looks like it's mostly dealing with transportation entities needing a permit to drive through the zone. Lots of discussion on most of the calls I've been on so far around transportation. So I'll answer it as best I can. In 2015, there was US requirements around driving through the zone. So that's the first thing to separate out. Is we'll wait and see how that determination comes from the US, but I can only tell you that in 2015, there was a requirement to drive around the zones. And then in terms of domestic stuff, it's certainly not recommended to drive through zones with poultry products and poultry.
Okay. Couple of questions about swabbing drinkers and sending them to Guelph as a means for detection, and asking how accurate are these results for using drinking swabs versus the cloacal and oral pharyngeal swab. Greg, you feel like answering that one, or does one of our veterinarians want to answer that one?
From the CFIA perspective, I had this question today actually, and confirmed that while the US has recognized some of these tests, CFIA has not. So it's not a part of the CFIA recognized testing to swab drinkers at this time. Okay.
Question about poults going into a farm. What permits is needed? Does the hatchery need a permit? Does the farmer need a permit? Does the hatchery need a separate permit? So just an example of birds going into there's a question. Are birds going into the zone?
Yeah, that's where I'll leave that one. I'd like to take most of these situations and really lump them in with an encouragement to call permitting, because every scenario is so different depending on where within the zone you're talking can come with different requirements, and so I'll leave that to the permitting experts that we have waiting on the line to answer those ones.
Yeah, and it kind of fits with Blair's next question about told that poultry chick placements in the 10K zone should not happen. So there's a timeline for that restriction. That's still that's fluid, right? Next question is about dairy goats. So and permitting is only required for poultry products, correct?
Sorry, which one are we on here?
I also have dairy goats. Do we need permits to get the milk shipped from our farm?
It's a poultry and poultry product restriction system. So
yeah, I think we have one last question there, Greg, that I'm not sure you can answer or not.
Word of another flock affected in Bruce County, and I know on the results. So ultimately, as I suggested, we are responding actively to any sick bird calls. In reality, it takes anywhere from 1 to 2, as many as 3 days to confirm those results.
Right. Okay. The questions are just, I'm not going to let you go, Greg. Whose responsibility is it to contact the diagnosis line producer or the vet? So this is in case we have the surveillance and diagnostic line. I'm assuming this is what this is referring to. So if someone suspects something.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll answer it as broadly as I can. In situations of 2015 and 17, we did see a number of people applying for permits on behalf of producers, things like feed companies and things like that. So ultimately, it's a case-by-case basis. But
oh no, Greg, I think this one was about, we have a concern that we've got sick birds. Who contacts the surveillance and diagnostic?
Oh, we'll take that call from anyone. Yeah,
okay.
We'll take that call from anyone.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, question about pullets being grown outside the zone into layer barns within the zone. So we've talked about pullets and we talked about chicks and poults for grown for meat. These are layers that will be in there for the full year. So is there any direction on that? So this is a once a year event, right? The pullets being placed.
Yeah, so all of that will become much clearer as we work into each of those premises, putting on, the official notices of quarantine is the way I would answer that question, right? So with that, it will become very clear as to the requirements for each farm. So unfortunately, it does take us a couple of days to get that done. Believe me, we work as fast as we can. We got to some today. We'll get to as many as we can tomorrow, as well as starting within IP2. So ultimately, those are part of those unanswered questions that will come here.
Right. We have a question about how we depup a farm or an operation, or if there's multiple barns, and this is reference to one of the current situation we have. What approach is it? Is it whole barn, whole premise, one barn?
Really, I'll stay away, from any specifics. Just saying that this is something that ultimately gets discussed within our planning groups and is actively taking place.
Question about CFO audits being switched to just sending everything over email versus visits. I will leave that one for CFO, or actually just contact your feather board at this point, right? When it comes to audits, whether it's whatever board you're dealing with. And the last question I can deal with offline. So with that, I think we've piled through a whack of questions. So thank you for that, Greg. We're gonna now, well, thank you for your help. You're gonna still be online if we have any other questions later on.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll stick around.
There. So thank you again. Okay, our next presentation is going to be from the Featherboard Command Center. It's going to be Ingrid DeVisser. We have a taped, not a tape. We're not using tape anymore. We have a recording of her that's we're going to put up. That's going to talk about the FBCC response, roles and measures, and I do believe she's talked a little bit about the Poultry Insurance Exchange also. So with that, I do believe that Ashley's going to try and pull the video up while we go through that to get Ingrid. So Ingrid is and for those of you who don't know Ingrid, she's a turkey farmer. She is also the incident, help me on this one, Gwen. She's the incident commander. No, she's not the incident commander. You're the second.
She's the chair of the Featherboard Command Center.
Thank you. And we do have Dr. Gwen Zillen here, and your role at FBCC, Gwen, is?
Yeah, I'm Deputy Incident Commander. Tom Baker's swamped, and so I'm representing him to answer any questions you might have after this presentation.
Excellent. And with that, we'll let Ingrid have her say.
Good evening. My name is Ingrid DeVisser, and I'm the chair of the Featherboard Command Center. Since the first reporting of a high mortality situation this past weekend and the subsequent activation of the Featherboard Command Center incident command structure, the folks who have been staffing the different sections of the IC structure have been extremely busy. So to that end, I've been asked to provide this group tonight with a brief overview of who FBCC is and what we are doing in the response to the current avian influenza outbreak. The Featherboard Command Center, FBCC, is made up of representatives from all 4 featherboards, as well as representatives from strategic industry partners, the Ontario Hatcheries Association, Poultry Service Association, the Association of Ontario Chicken Processors, and the Ontario Agribusiness Association. FBCC's primary goal is to coordinate the Ontario poultry industry's emergency response to targeted diseases like avian influenza through promoting preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery. The Featherboard Command Center has broken down communication and cooperation barriers, has expanded its influence, and engaged industry and government partners in a sustainable and resilient Ontario emergency management system. The FBCC Emergency Management Plan positions the industry to initiate response as needed and to partner with government in its response efforts and ultimately early recovery to normal operations. Currently, FBCC is collaborating with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs to respond to the avian influenza situation and to ensure that our industry has a coordinated response. This includes working directly with affected farmers and industry, planning for business continuity, and ensuring regular communication with farmers, industry stakeholders, and the general public. Many of our farmers have reached out regarding compensation in the event of avian influenza disease on your farm. Direct compensation is strictly between farmers and the CFIA. However, we would like to remind farmers about the Poultry Insurance Exchange, PI. PI provides insurance and risk management services to all farmers in the 4 featherboards. PI is licensed under Part 13 of the Insurance Act of Ontario to undertake the exchange of reciprocal contracts of insurance among its subscribers. Starting in 2018, all Egg Farmers of Ontario, Ontario Broiler Hatchery Egg and Chick Commission, and Chicken Farmers of Ontario producers are subscribers. Turkey Farmers of Ontario producers joined in 2021. Farmers should reach out to their respective boards for commodity-specific details. We thank you for taking the time to join the webinar this evening. Our industry has a strong record of collaboration and preparedness, and recovery is a shared priority. We will continue to keep you updated. In coming days, FBCC will be coordinating a daily CFIA, OMAFRA, FBCC update for producers and industry stakeholders. We will reach out with more information tomorrow. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to FBCC's disease alerts by visiting the FBCC website at fbcc.ca. Thank you, and please during these next days, exercise heightened biosecurity on your farms, throughout the industry, and anywhere you go. It's so very, very important. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to Ingrid for that. I'm just trying to take a look here at some questions. We actually have a question about pullets wanting to leave hotspots to go to barns not in hotspots. This is Delmarva. Delmarva is not Canada. So we'll let that one. I think the question about will pullets in hotspots be held or to control spread, that is one that between for the Board Command Center, EFO, and CFI, that'll have to be discussed. Correct, Gwen?
Yeah, that's a question really for CFIA, and like Greg answered, if there's specific questions on movements and permits, that would be directed there.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, is there any other questions? Oh, a couple more questions there. Let's see, does CFI currently have the capacity to assess a proven and demonstrated cost-effective method to reduce the risk of airborne viral transfer? So we're talking about whether there's a way to reduce pathogen transmission through airborne. Do you want to take a crack at that one, Gwen?
Al, you're as equipped to take that one, I think.
Okay.
I see Greg's come back on, but it's more of a research type question, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest is, you know, we certainly do have a science branch, but not in a position to cover that one for sure.
Okay, so I think we may have, if there's no other questions at the moment for FBCC. Oh, no, here we do. Do all upcoming chick placements within the FBCC zone have to have a new home outside the zone?
There was an advisory that went out a day ago to all of industry and all of the farmers in the zones, encouraging them to, as we work together with government, to make placements outside the zone in an alternate growing arrangement, if possible. What that will do is restrict the virus load and the birds in the zone and help with managing the disease spread. There may be additional requirements once CFIA has established the zone, but that's yet to be determined.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think we've answered the questions we have up so far. So if that's...
Now, there was one question in the earlier presentation, responsibilities, like who's providing the biosecurity gear.
Yes.
And I'll say that it's the responsibility of the farmers to have their own biosecurity gear. This is no surprise in that it's part of their regular audit requirements. And you might, this is an odd response, but really through COVID, we've really experienced the practicalities in having this additional biosecurity gear, so it's become more routine.
Right. Oh, question about, actually, maybe this is a good question to start throwing around or getting our heads wrapped around. For organic inspections, are inspectors allowed to do inspections in the zone? I'm assuming this means in the zone with this question.
So part of our communications as well is that all feather boards, so the 4 boards, have agreed that unless it's a very high risk situation, there would be no on-farm visits, audits during this period.
And of course, that's because of the risk of spreading disease either from farm to farm or wherever. So you're actually not even doing inspections outside the zone then at this point, right? Like for sure inside the zone.
Not en masse. There may be some that are for higher risk reasons, or new barns inspections, those sorts of things that need to be done. But otherwise, audits will be done through paper process or rescheduled.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't leave us there, Gwen, because we got more questions. What biosecurity supplies would you suggest farmers to prepare in advance?
It's your regular biosecurity gear that you have as part of your practices with your production.
Okay, and I think the last question might be a Greg question. Are there any requirements for a permit to transport feed if your feed mill is inside the zone and you are outside the zone?
Sorry, again, I'll defer to the permitting question just to make sure that we get those ones right.
Yeah. So if there's a question about permitting, call the movement control line that was listed.
I hope everybody sees it in the chat. I put the number and there's an email address associated in the chat as well.
Okay. Another question. Some of us are waiting to see if we live inside the zone and cannot work until the zone boundaries are confirmed. I guess that's another one for you, Greg. If you're working as hard as you can to get the zones up.
Certainly can, and we made some grounds today. Certainly hope to make a lot more in the next 2 days. So we are tirelessly working on it. I can confirm that. And
the last question here, Greg, is one yours again, so don't go away. Question about backyard flocks. So if we have a positive backyard flock, what is the process? It would be the same as if it was a commercial in terms of your response, correct?
Yeah, exactly. We do respond to sick bird calls at small flocks. We still do the same level of testing, and then the response from there would be confirmed as we go. But ultimately, I guess the short answer to that is yes, we would follow up on instances of confirmed high path AI and small flocks.
And if it was positive, we would be zoning, like you would be doing the zones again, just like we would for a commercial flock.
Yeah, those would all be at least considered as part of the commercial flock. It is still all part of the considerations.
Okay. And I do believe that covers this off for now. So thank you, Gwen. Thank you again, Greg. And with that, and Gwen and Greg will still be around. So if we have other questions that come up later, they will be available to grace us with an answer, hopefully, if we can. So our next speaker is going to be Jeff Jansen. I do believe, Jeff, are you on? You're going to be talking about some of the AgriStability options that farmers have.
So yeah, I just want to start off by introducing myself and thanking thank you for the opportunity to present. So my name's Jeff Jansen. I'm a Senior Program and Policy Specialist with AgriCorps. Also on the line, I've got Debbie Brander from AgriCorps and John Cumming from OMAFRA. So if there are questions, certainly raise your hands, let me know, and one of the three of us will do our best to answer. So again, thank you for the opportunity. Happy to present and be here to speak to the group. So as Al mentioned, basically we just want to go over a quick program overview, give you some updates about some of the options that are available, which is primarily AgriStability, and then again, as mentioned, we can deal with some questions. Starting off, again, we understand the severity of what's happening in the industry right now, and we just want to confirm and illustrate that we are here to support the sector. So we're certainly happy to talk with producers, look at the coverage options that are available for them within AgriStability, and then ultimately, hopefully, help them make the best decision that's best for their operation. Again, we'll get into a little bit of detail, but essentially the situation that's in front of us right now with AI, it's certainly allowable activity and allowable expenses that the producer would incur under AgriStability. So there's a direct link there. And this is true also for supply managed operations, which again, another reason why it's important for us to be here this evening is because we, generally speaking, haven't had a whole lot of enrollment in AgriStability or its various iterations over the past 20 years or so. So certainly just wanted to make sure that producers were aware and informed of their options and how the program works. That next bullet there, again, there's a lot of information that's involved in the program. and there's a link there that producers can look at if they want to take this offline and dive a little bit deeper. And then, as I mentioned earlier, again, if producers do have questions, they can certainly contact us at that email address on the screen or by calling our call center. So diving a little bit deeper into the program itself, AgriStability. So it's a whole farm margin-based disaster program that protects a producer when their net income of their whole farm drops below 70% of their previous average. I mentioned that whole farm aspect. So again, it looks at the whole operation, not just one commodity or one aspect of production in isolation. And again, it does cover crops, livestock, and byproducts. So again, it's certainly applicable for this group. And again, wide-ranging coverage in the sense of production issues, increased costs, market conditions. The program covers all of those. So that's certainly a key takeaway here. A little bit more here again on the risks. Again, some of these we covered previously, but again, large declines. Again, that 70% coverage. So anything below that 70% level relative to the historic, that's when it would kick in. Again, we talk about lost markets. Again, if there's an outbreak here, producers certainly could be affected by that. Increased costs, again, as you're well aware, certainly something that we're seeing now and can see in the future. Lower market prices, again, maybe not so much at play here, but it certainly is applicable and covered under the program as well. And then again, the last piece here, anything from a quality perspective, yield reduction, disease, pests. So again, certainly within our current scope here. And then finally, anything related to on-farm disruptions due to COVID-19. So fairly wide ranging. Couple of changes here, again, just to make sure everyone's up to speed with the current iteration. There's been some changes in the program over the last 6 to 12 months, so just wanted to highlight those. Producers, it does provide whole farm coverage, again, as we mentioned at the top, again, specifically around input cost. One option, I think we dive a little bit deeper on the next slide, producers can apply for an interim payment, which is basically an in-year estimate where a producer has not yet completed their fiscal year, but it's obvious that they're having a tough go and they've want to access funds within the program. They can apply for an interim payment. And again, we'll dive a little bit deeper on that in the next slide. The change, or one of the more recent changes again that I mentioned, is the removal of the reference margin limit, and that started with the 2020 program year. So we're certainly processing that year and beyond now. So basically what had happened going back a few program years, the RML was in place, which essentially had the effect of lowering support level for certain industries depending on your cost structure. But that, again, back in June of last year, the government removed that aspect of the program. So basically it had the effect of increasing, or the potential to increase, support level. So that's certainly a positive, especially in light of the current situation. And then finally, another more recent change, and this is one that's specific to Ontario, and that is the government of Ontario made a change to the program where they were changing the compensation rate from 70% to 80% on the provincial portion of the payment that Ontario farmers receive. And again, like the RML change, this change was effective starting with the 2020 growing season. So again, this is something that producers would see automatically in the event that they're in the program and they receive the payment. This next slide here, this is key, especially for producers who are considering getting into AgriStability, and if they're not in already. So this is just an illustration of sort of the cycle itself. Similar to insurance, producers sign up before something goes wrong. So right now, here we are on March 29th. The deadline to join the program is April 30th of 2022. So we've got just approximately a month for producers to think about that and make that decision. And again, at that time, there would be a fee associated with that. They'd have to pay that fee as well. There are some provisions to extend that fee payment, but by and large, April 30th is that initial deadline. So that's a key piece there to join and both join and secure coverage by making that by paying that fee. I mentioned that interim again, so you're within your fiscal period, and again, for simplicity, we'll use a calendar year-end producer. So once they've hit that 6 months of production, so June 30th comes and goes. Again, as I mentioned, it's clear they're having some difficulties. They expect a margin decline. They can certainly apply for an interim payment at that time. They can also do that later in the cycle, so they can do that right up until the end of their fiscal period as well. But again, if it's obvious, we would encourage producers to take a look at that and then apply. And then from there, again, it is a tax and production-based program. So from there, a producer would finish their fiscal year end, and then next June 2023, a producer would follow up with their tax information from 2022 as well as their productive information. And at that time, we would adjudicate their file and make an assessment. And again, if they did have an interim, we'd look at that and say, okay, well, producer received an interim benefit, and this is how that compares to their final situation. And then again, we'd right size that payment. And if it was vastly overpaid, then there'd be a situation where we'd go back and make that adjustment. But traditionally, what you see is, again, interns are paid at a rate of 50%. So in an ideal situation, we simply make the balance of that payment once that information is submitted. A little bit information here on allowable income and expenses, which we touched on earlier, and again talked about the tax-based aspect of the program. So that farm income and expense, which is reported to CRA, is key information that we use to calculate margins. So that is certainly something that we look at and use during adjudication. It includes all income and expenses directly relating to producing a commodity. And again, we've got a bit of an example here of what commodity or what expenses are allowable, and conversely, which ones are non-allowable. So this is long-standing in the design of the program, and if producers are familiar with the program, they'd be quite familiar with this as well. Specifically, again, we're talking that last bullet there, costs relating to a call. Those, by and large, would be covered for the most part. Again, subject to the list that we have here. This is just a real quick payment scenario, just to give you a sense of how that works. So again, we've got an average net farming income. So this is what we refer to as your reference margin. That's your support level based on your previous experience. So in this situation, it's $200,000. We talk again about that 70% coverage level. So therefore, any drop in your current program, your production margin, that would take you below 140,000. Would result in a program payment. This scenario itself, we see that in year income, that production margin going down to zero, so a dramatic drop. And then conversely, you see that 2022 payment as a result. Interim payments, again, covered this for the most part earlier, but again, certainly stress this to the group. One knock on AgStab, again, because it is tax-based, is that it's not always timely. But this aspect of the program does allow us to make payments in a very timely fashion. So certainly, again, if it's applicable to the operation, certainly encourage a producer to at least take a look at that. The interim payment application itself is on our website. And again, you can access that information at the end of the slide deck. Just again, another reminder here on enrollment. And again, specifically for 2022, April 30th is the deadline, and that is April 30th of this year, and that is to join for the 2022 program year. If a producer is already in the program, they would have already seen that their enrollment notice, again, because that's sent out automatically to producers that are in the program previously. So if you're in it, take note of that notice and again, act on it by April 30th. either by canceling coverage, which again is probably likely not the case at this time, or by paying the fee. Or again, if you're a new participant at this time, contact us by April 30th and let us know that you want in the program. And then again, that'll sort of set things in motion. And then finally, again, just some information in terms of where producers can gain access to additional information, and then also how they can contact us. And with that, I will open up the floor to questions.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I don't think we have any questions for you at AgriCorp, but I actually do have one, I think, for FBCC and Gwen. The question is, will CFO or TFO allow leasing or renting of barns to produce poultry outside the restricted areas if needed?
You work with your own board, and it has to be from CFO's perspective, it gets approved through the board. This was done in 2015 quite effectively. So work together, obviously, to find alternate growing arrangements. It gets approved, and then to make it happen, and that really helps with the overall business continuity and to minimize the risk.
Great, thank you, Gwen. We do have a question for Jeff. What is the cost approximately to sign up for the AgriStability program?
So it's roughly $315 per $100,000 in support level. So it's based on your reference margin. So that's a rough equivalent. So $315 per 100,000.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Oh, here we go. In 2015, there were large costs to clean barns to CFIA requirements to lift restrictions. This is the C&D cost. Is the C&D cost totally up to individual farms? Does AgriCorp or other programs help with this? So I may actually get Jeff and Gwen to answer this one.
And Gwen, you can take a stab at it first if you'd like.
You'd have to contact your board for the specifics about your insurance program. In the case of CFO, it is included in the AI insurance program.
But then I guess, Jeff, any other outstanding costs potentially could be covered by AgriCorp?
There certainly could be some coverage through AgriStability, things such as on-farm labor, and again, contract, depending on how it's coded and the nature of it. It could be something that's covered under AgriStability. Okay.
We have a question. What is pie? Besides something you eat for dessert, Poultry Insurance Exchange is what it represents. Okay, and I think with that, if there's no more questions for Jeff or Gwen regarding compensation or AgriStability payments, we're off to the second half of our program. Just to give a quick rounding of what to expect for the next little while, Dr. Lucy, Lucy Roscoe, who is our poultry veterinarian, will give us a quick update on the high-path AI status around the world, North America. Dr. Sandra Stevens from CFIA will talk to us about Dr. Kathleen from Maple Leaf will talk about high-path clinical signs, and Dr. Sandra Stevens will give us a bit more details on what to expect at the farm. Dr. Brian Stevens will talk to us about wild birds and what's our concern with that. And finally, we'll end up with Dan Ward talking about how to deal with disposal options on an infected site. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lucy Roscoe. She's my counterpart on the poultry team at OMAFRA. And thank you, Jeff, for that.
You're welcome. Thanks, Al.
So Lucy's talk, once again, will be about highly pathogenic avian influenza, what we're seeing around the world, what we're seeing around North America. And we've already covered a little bit about what we've seen in Ontario. So with that, I'll over to Lucy.
Good evening, everyone. So a little bit about myself. I've been working for the Ministry of Agriculture since 2010, and I do oversee the ministry poultry file in the past year. The highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreaks in wild birds and poultry are no longer a rare phenomenon. In the past 15 years, the outbreaks caused by H5 viruses that emerged in Southeast of Asia in 1996 have been increased in frequency. Between 2005 and 2010, at least 10 high-path H5 incursions were identified in Europe, resulting in mass mortalities among poultry and wild birds. The majority of H5 virus detection in wild and domestic birds within Europe coincides with southwest-westward fall migration and large local water bird aggregation during wintering. This presentation will provide you an overview of high-path H5N1 and what we have learned so far from the virus spread mode and outbreaks. Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is publishing monthly the global avian influenza outbreaks. This map displays the distribution of global avian influenza virus detection with zoonotic potential as of March 23rd. Clusters of positive cases are mostly detected in China, Africa, Europe, and North America. The same organization is reporting the events by subtype and regions. The two slides are to compare the numbers between February and March this year. The predominant strain identified is H5N1, and the most affected region is Europe, followed by North America and Africa. It is estimated that more than 50 million poultry died or have been culled since September 2021, with just over 800 outbreaks of H5N1 in the past month. Moving forward, Europe is on the top with the number of the events. Since October 2021, Europe has experienced over 1,500 high-path outbreaks in poultry and captive flocks, and over 2,000 detection in wild birds, with a peak detection in November and December last year. The green dots are the non-poultry outbreaks, and the red ones are the poultry events. Among European countries, France, Netherlands, and Poland are experiencing high numbers of outbreaks. Recently, France has a spike in cases located on the west side of the country, and the numbers reached a little bit over 792 cases on March 15, compared with 555 outbreaks 1 week before. Just 237 events in 1 week. You can imagine how they are dealing there, and then how we're dealing here with 3 cases only. The Netherlands steps up high-path control, given the devastating impact the virus can have, and currently no one-size-fits-all solutions to the bird flu situation in Europe. By speeding up the vaccine trial and tightening biosecurity, continue to monitor the situation closely, but also they were ordering to be culled all poultry within 3 kilometers of the outbreak. Massive wild bird detection of high-path demonstrates that the virus is in a continuous spread mode. Given the massive environmental contamination with this virus, several Western European countries are even considering that this virus spread may become endemic, and they may have to live with it. As of March 17, 2021-22, Europe reported about over 2,000 wild birds detection spread over 33 states, with Germany on the top rank with over 1,100 cases, followed by France of 800 and Netherlands with 434. And how the migratory flyways and how this virus serotype got in North America, data reported and in combination with the recent findings in Newfoundland, Canada, point to this being the first documented introduction of Eurasian origin of the virus into the wild birds via the Atlantic flyway. The potential introduction pathway likely includes wild bird migratory routes from Northern Europe that overlap Arctic region of North America, and then dispersal further south to Canada, United States. Wild bird species and the individual birds play different roles in the epidemiology of high-path H5 viruses, and wild birds that may act as a vector most successfully are migratory birds that excrete virus in the absence of clinical signs disease. North America is crossed by 4 flyways, and Ontario is under Atlantic and Mississippi flyways. The second picture is the global flyways, and there are 8 major flyways on the entire globe, and most of them intersect on the top or on the bottom. I put together 2 slices of in 2 different, like a week or 1 week, 9 days apart. United States Geological Survey has created an interactive map of distribution data that includes laboratory confirmative cases of HIPAT H5 and HIPAT H5N1 viruses as reported by U.S. Department of Agriculture, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and the World Organization for Animal Health and State Agriculture Natural Resources Management Agencies. These slices are between March 18 and then March 27, and the events are marked by dots. The red ones representing the commercial poultry outbreaks, the yellow ones are the non-poultry backyard and small flocks, and the green ones, the wild birds. As you can see, the numbers are increasing exponentially in the past month, and is related with the spring seasonal migration. The numbers of outbreaks in the United States in the past 2 months reached to 58, located in 18 states, and among this, 34 events involved commercial poultry. Over 13 million poultry is being lost in this outbreaks. Also, the HIPAT H5N1 has been detected in more than 450 wild birds that comprises 31 species in 21 states. The next slide, the most important one, it is about the Canada status. As you may know, in the commercial poultry, we did have 2 outbreaks in Ontario, one on March 27 and then the other one on March 28. We are at the beginning of the season, but the outbreaks have been reported on East Canada since December 2021 in Newfoundland and Labrador, followed by Nova Scotia in February this year. Until March 27, we've had only 6 outbreaks, and among this, one was the commercial turkey flock, and the other one was a mixed poultry, both located in Nova Scotia. And like I said, Ontario just declared 2 outbreaks in 2 turkey flocks. We also had some outbreaks in the backyard flocks in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. Nothing declared so far in Ontario. Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative continued to detect a HIPAT in wild birds, and with the British Columbia positive bald eagle confirmed that this virus has been detected in all 4 flyways. Ontario has had one detection last week on a red-tailed hawk, and that was in Waterloo region area. And we'll have Dr. Stevens from CWHC will have more details with his deck on the wildlife surveillance. Why the avian influenza is a concern for us? Increasing disease outbreaks, increasing the risk for Ontario. First of all, it's not a food safety risk, but it is a zoonotic disease and low risk to general public, but can spread to humans that are in direct contact with live birds. Also, low pathogenic H5, H7 viruses can evolve into highly pathogenic viruses. From the economic point of view, as all we know, high mortality in domestic poultry, especially turkeys and chickens, rapid spread between farms, flocks, if strict biosecurity is not in place, and of course, serious production, economic, and trade losses. Others, as I showed before, migratory birds are reservoirs for avian influenza viruses, but they're often asymptomatic, and the risk increases with spring and fall global migration. Not to mention, pigs are susceptible to avian influenza viruses, and the infection in pigs can result in new strains of avian influenza. A little bit about definition of poultry. Maybe some are confused, especially the ones that they decided to be on a non-poultry definition. Last year in May 2021, World Health Organization decided to put definition for what means poultry and what means non-poultry. And birds that are raised or kept in captivity in the following situations: so they produce any commercial animal products, they breed for commercial product production, or fighting cocks used for any purpose, or they're used for restocking supplies of game or for breeding for this purpose, they are considered poultry. And this will have trade implication if there is an outbreak. However, non-poultry definition, their captive birds are not considered poultry when kept in the following situation: a single household and the products that are used exclusively within that household. They're used in exhibition, zoological collection, competition, and bred birds for breeding or selling for the above purposes. But this is provided that they have no direct or indirect contact with poultry or poultry facilities. So if there is a, regardless what type of poultry they are, if it is a outbreak of H5N1 or H7, the consequences are the same, except that there will be trade or no trade implication. What we have learned so far about this virus, that introduction of the virus into the poultry farms can occur through shared equipment, contaminated boots, and insufficient decontamination food baths. Groundwater was also reported to play a role into the transmission of the avian influenza virus between poultry and wild birds during the outbreaks. Farming practices such as disposal of contaminated carcasses in the environment may have exposed wild birds as well as neighboring farms to H5 viruses. Rodents can be abundant around poultry farms and may play a role in the transmission of high path viruses to poultry. And keep in mind that wind-borne spread may move the viruses, but only over a short distance. And what have we learned so far about the outbreaks? High pathogenic avian influenza positive wild birds reported this season in Canada have exponentially increased. Almost all outbreaks on farms in Canada and the United States are from point source introduction, not lateral spread. Biosecurity is the line of defense, and the risk of the virus introduction in the poultry farms by wild birds vary by region due to differences in poultry production system, farm density, and wild bird population distribution, but also open poultry production systems such as backyard and free-range farms were often reported as primary infected farms. That's all I have so far. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. There was a question that was emailed to me actually while you were talking about the human health side. You had a couple of slides on there, you know, about concerns, whether it's for employees or yourselves if you're working on an infected farm. That one is maybe a little bit outside of our wheelhouse with Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care.
I don't think I can play the role of the public health here. However, research is being done and trying to identify if there's a difference between the serotypes, and the vaccine, the actual vaccine for humans will protect for avian influenza if you are taking it. I'm not pushing it. I'm not saying you have to. I'm not public health here. I'm not a medical doctor. But when they tested for the serotype, it looks like it's only one amino acid that is missing from the structure and the genotype of the actual virus.
So
and
yeah,
it's not food safety. So if you consume the product that is safely cooked, then it's not food safety. However, if you get in contact with the birds that are sick, then you need to protect yourself from not getting the virus.
and I think another comment is that there is information being put together by Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, Public Health Agency of Canada, and that'll be shared with the public health units so that we're all on the same page. That information will be distributed through various channels, including Weather Board Command Center and us and CFIA. There is a question about first indications of H5N1 in poultry. That I think will be covered by Kathleen in the next one when we talk about clinical signs. So I'll put that one on a parking lot. There's also a question about risks of fertilized eggs becoming infected. I think that one we can get Kathleen to answer also in her presentation, if that's okay. And if that is all there is, there was a question I think still from before that we missed about for Jeff, I think, for the Emergency Services Fund. So what is the Emergency Services Fund for? Jeff, if you're still on, or Jeff still not be available anymore. We can get back to that one at a later time. So with that, Dr. Lucy, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we will now flip it over to Dr. Kathleen. Sorry, you guys. Well, the industry will know her as the veterinarian for Maple Leaf Poultry, but she's also here representing the Ontario Association of Poultry Veterinarians. She will be talking to us about what clinical signs look like. And Kathleen, just as a reminder, there's a question here about what are the first indications of H5N1 in poultry that producers should look out for. Is there any risk to fertilized eggs becoming infected? And you can fill that in as you do your talk, or Dr. Sandra Stevenson can too. So,
or if I forget, you just remind me.
Yes, there we go.
Hi everyone. So wanted to go back a little bit to basics and build on what Lucy just talked about. So yes, there is circulation of avian influenza virus worldwide, and both in domestic and wild birds with different strains. And if you hear about the high PAT AI, so HPAI, or LPAI, so low pathogenic avian influenza, those two are both considered notifiable avian influenza by CFIA. So you may hear about just AI or high PAT AI or LPAI. And why I'm talking about this, because the differences between the two are basically linked to the severity of the disease. And this is linked to the clinical signs that you may see. And because also this virus has the ability to mutate, and as Lucy mentioned, it can go from a low PAT AI to a high PAT AI, or even to a new strain. It means that there's a really wide range of clinical signs it could be seeing on farm. So if you take the interaction with both the characteristic of those of the virus that I just went over, plus a different host, whether it's turkey, domestic poultry, wild birds, you may have, again, a wide range of clinical signs, which I'll cover in a little bit. I wanted to talk about transmission, because I think for everybody on the call, understanding how this virus transmits will help you think and rethink about your biosecurity measures, and are you controlling everything you can at this moment. So two mode of transmission, it can be direct from the fecal material, fecal droppings of the birds that are infected, or nasal secretion from the birds that are infected to other birds that are infected, or I'll say indirect, whether the same organic material, feces, nasal secretions on equipments or tools that are brought in the farm, or even somebody stepping on droppings from I'll say a geese in front of the barn and entering the barn then with those contaminated footwear. So understanding these two pieces, fecal material, nasal secretions, are really important, because when we talk about having, again, control, cleaning and disinfection, it also having the presence of organic matter can also increase the survival or the resistance of that virus. So make sure that you remove all those organic material when you do your cleaning and disinfection, whether it's boots or anything that you can keep in, like tires, right? Anything that would be going into this kind of material. And I wanted also to highlight how we can destroy the virus, right? It's important to know our enemy here. And this virus is a good news, because this virus is actually sensitive. So it's sensitive to heat, it's sensitive to extreme of pH, and it's sensitive to dryness. It's also a virus that we call enveloped. So because it's enveloped, then it's easily inactivated by detergent. And again, if you're thinking of having the virus in organic material or organic matter, then it might be a little bit more resistant, and other kind of chemicals you would want to turn towards, and it would be chemicals such as aldehyde, so meaning formaldehyde or glutaraldehyde. Okay, so I'll be now focusing more on the clinical sign. So when you're one of the first signs you may hear about is a sudden increase, and that is the first sign you may hear about, know about, or talk about, but it's not specific to high PAT AI. There's no no specific sign. So pathognomonic means specific sign for this disease. You have to pay attention to both the context and also the clinical sign that your birds are showing. And also whether you have turkey, whether you have ducks, for example, or whether you have chickens. So for example, if you're looking at commercial poultry flock, then you may have an increase in mortality, but the flock may be quiet and the birds may be prostrated, and that would be a red flag already that you're having a really, that you may want to investigate further. Giving you another example here, so a small flock where you have maybe some birds that are like some chickens that are actually dead, but the ducks are actually looking fine. And that starts to be a little bit strange, right? But you have that commingling of the susceptible birds and less susceptible birds, and you have access outside, you have access to a pond, or you have presence of wild ducks. And this is actually a very high risk context in this case. And in, for the sake of it, I have a third example. So you have a primary breeders, and that's a case from the 2015, where you could have very few birds dying from a turkey flock, a breeder turkey flock, but across the street, you have actually an infected broiler barn, and you have the wind blowing from the broiler barn to that breeder barn, for example. And that would be something that would be also within that context, we would be raising the flag. And I want to note that these following slides are courtesy of CFIA. They were presented before. I'm just retaking them because they were good and the content is actual in here. Make sure we repeat the same message. And I have beautiful pictures on this. So high risk context, so I want you to think and do the exercise, and we'll go through different questions here. On the birds that have outdoor access, is there a pond near your farm, or are you using the pond water or water that would be having access to wild birds to actually water your birds and provide the water in your water lines? Is there wild birds on site? And I can give you examples of either starling defecating on your rooftop. This is actually one of the comments in the US that has been made, where they think it might be the reason why they had positive when they did the epidemiological studies, and then that heavy rain would have poured the droppings into the barn. Some way, are you having barn swallows making their nests? Are you having pigeon eating next to your bins, eating the feed that dropped there? So any contact with wild birds, that would be to be on a higher alert. And again, mixed avian species waterfowl, if you're seeing that close by, and that would be the high risk context. So I have a series of questions, and I think these are good. It's a good exercise to ask if you have a gap in your biosecurity protocols. So I'll just read through those questions. I have 2 slides of questions in here. So are migratory waterfowl present in the area? How close is the flock to one in which AI has been confirmed? How close is the flock to the nearest poultry farm? How close is the flock to a domestic waterfowl flock? Are waterfowl present on this farm? Do birds from this flock have access to free range? What percentage of the time are birds completely confined? How close is the nearest surface water, whether it's pond or slough, to the barn? Do family members or employees have contact with wildfowl? Is it hunting or near the premise? Do wild birds such as starlings able to enter the barn and eat from the feeders? And I forgot to mention, when we talk about wild birds, there's also bird feeders. If you have bird feeders near your farm, that might be something you want to remove. Are there multiple ages of birds present on the farm? How many birds are housed on this farm? Do farm employees have contact with other poultry? How many people drove onto the farm per week in the past month? Are deliveries made to the farm by company that service commercial poultry farm? our carcasses are stored and or disposed of, compost or incineration in close proximity to one or more of the barn's production units, so less than 15 meters or 50 feet. What is the water source? Our bedding materials, wood shavings, straw, stored in a manner which prevent contamination by wild birds, such as pigeon, starlings, and wildfowl feces. So now moving to what actually are the clinical signs of avian influenza. So some of the clinical signs may be evident, as we mentioned earlier, right? High and sudden mortality would be one of your indicator. Also quietness and extreme depression. And we'll have an example of depression is a bird that is lethargic, a bird that's not responsive, a bird that's like looks tired if you want. Then you also have a drop in production of eggs that can be also soft shell eggs and shellless. Note that drop of production can be also caused by other things, but it would be something as a veterinarian that we would now keep in mind as a diagnostic differentials. Diarrhea, so loose droppings, hemorrhage on the hocks, swelling on the skin under the eyes, wattles and comb that become swollen or congested, so very red, very enlarged. Incubation, and the incubation period of AI ranges between 2 and 14 days. So the other pictures I have here are images of what birds can look like when they have these clinical signs. So you have birds that can look, in this case is a lethargy or depression, mortality or diarrhea, so you have the loose droppings. So usually you see them more formed, but in this case you see that they're more kind of runny, more liquid. The soft shell eggs or the shell-less eggs. You have the swollen wattle, comb, and face. And then you can see the edema of the face and the neck, and the hemorrhage of the thymus. And externally, you can see the hemorrhage of the shank. So some of the questions that were asked was about the fertilized eggs. So what what might happen if we have a breeder flock that is infected, what happened is that the embryo might not hatch. So the flock would result in a lower hatch, a much lower hatch. It would be identified as a much really lower hatch. And then I think I'll need a reminder of what the other questions were.
Right, so the question was, first indication is H5N1, which you've covered. Any risk to fertilized eggs being infected? So I guess if it's already fertilized and it's okay, should be okay, correct?
Yeah, so if the fertilized egg is, yeah, it should be, it's at the hatchery, then you'll see if the flock is positive, then you'll see a drop in hatch. Yeah. So the embryo may not survive.
Yeah, so I think the question is, if you have fertilized eggs and the flock is healthy, yeah, that fertilized egg is probably not a risk. It's not going to get AI through.
Oh, no. Okay, sorry. Yeah, no, you're right. Yes, that's correct.
There was a question about lateral spread, which I think you've spoken about already in terms of small amounts of wind being able to transfer for that. So, you're actually, well, let's keep going through questions then, since I have you here, Kathleen. There was a question about, is there a vaccine available in an approved Canada for human vaccine? Well, no, not for H5N1. It's just the human flu. The reason that we recommend that everyone in the fall get the flu vaccine, both from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, both if you work in swine or poultry, is so that you don't become an inadvertent mixing vessel. So if you have the human flu and your birds have bird flu, if you pick up the bird flu from your birds, viruses love to exchange information, and that could be the next new virus. John has a question about preheating a barn before placement. Bedding is down. What is the temp and time to control the virus?
So what we see in publication, they talk about having, what they recommend is 95 to 100 Fahrenheit for a week. So this is what is recommended. Practically, I don't know if other people like Al or other people here, veterinarian has the other recommendation that they know it worked, but this is what I've been reading about.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure if there's a concern, if John's got a concern about, do I preheat my barn to try and, if I have, like, if, I guess the question, when do you get virus, right? Like if there's no virus in your barn, will preheating your barn help? I guess it will, but for that temperature, for how long did you say again? A week?
So yeah, that's what the literature said. Now I know for other viruses, I know like 4 days is sufficient. So this is, yeah, again, it's sensitive to dryness and it's sensitive to heat.
Excellent. And I think that covers the questions that we had outstanding for you, Kathleen. So thank you very much again for that. It was a great presentation. We got lots of pictures to show what we're looking for. If you see any of that thing, we should be then bringing that discussion to that next step where Dr. Sandra Stevens from CFIA will now come online, and she will tell us about some of the steps you see, what you should do after you see what Kathleen has presented. So at this point, I'll ask Dr. Sandra Stevens from CFIA to talk about some of the challenges that will be happening after you see something like that.
As much as I would like to say I'm happy to be here tonight and speak with the Ontario poultry producers, this is not really the greatest of time. I've been through this a number of times in my career with CFIA, and I can understand some of the anxiety and that's happening right now. So what I want to do tonight with this is just give you, Greg had given you this is what's happening in Ontario right now. And then you've had a couple of other presentations about the disease and where it's at. And what I want to go with this presentation is really just go to what happens on your farm, like what you can expect if you go out to your barn and you see some signs that Kathleen was just talking about. Then these are some of the things that you can expect to happen. And then I'm going to carry that over into if it was suspected and now we confirm it, then what's going to happen at that point in time. So everything that we do in CFIA is covered under the Health of Animals Act, and this has a fairly broad scope of powers that go with it. But these first two points here, the ability to investigate the suspicion of animal disease and impose movement restrictions, are going to be two important things that happen when we have that suspicion. So if we're just going to look at those to begin with, and then we'll roll into the rest afterwards. So this suspicion can come to us from any number of ways, and it can be clinical signs observed on the farm, either by the farmer themselves or by the veterinarian or someone who works on the farm. They can be clinical signs or post-mortem lesions that are found in an abattoir, or they can be detected at a non-CFIA laboratory. So the CASM lab in Ontario would be an example of a CASM lab, or they could be detected by the CFIA laboratory. There is another way that we can be notified, and that was if, say, we shipped some birds to the US and they found that they were positive for AI, then we would be notified that way. So that investigation being triggered is a really important part. The sooner that we get notification that someone is suspicious, the sooner we can take action. So this slide represents the series of actions that can take place once we have a suspicion. So in most cases, that suspicion is going to arise due to passive surveillance. So it's you observing your birds in the barn, or maybe you've submitted birds to the lab for some other reason, and in their pathologic examination, they determine that this is AI or that it could be AI. So once that suspicion happens, there's a series of actions that will take place. And when we come to the farm, so within a few hours of notification, things are going to happen. So biosecurity is really important. And at this point in time, for the investigation of a suspicion, we're concerned with the containment, the management, and the exclusion. We will also have a big focus on epidemiology. It's getting the history of what's happening on your farm. We'll do the diagnostics, and we'll impose movement controls. So these will all happen pretty shortly after you report that suspicion. And that, in the context of the outbreak that you're in right now, for people who are located close to those farms that are already identified as positive, your reporting is going to go back to the incident command post or the EOC. That's the numbers that Greg had up there. If you're located on the other side of the province and you're 200 or 300 kilometers away, then that suspicion may be reported to your district office, because in some respects it becomes a different outbreak because you're quite geographically separated. So on the phone call, the veterinarian that answers the phone at the CFIA office is going to actually ask you a lot of questions. And these are things that you as a producer, and especially now when we know we've got high path AI circulating, should have these things prepared and ready to go. And I think with a lot of your preparedness activity that you've done in Ontario, that you're likely aware of some of these things, is that you need to have your production records, your mortality records, depending on the nature of your production system, what type of records you have available. They're going to want to get information on what type of birds you have, how many birds you have, how many barns you have. If you have aerial photographs and a site plan, that's always really good to send into the district office, or in the case of if it's at the EOC/incident command post, so that they have an understanding before they even get to your premises of where they're going to set things up. We need to know where the location, power, water, things like that are for when we set up our biosecurity lines and when we're doing an examination of the birds and that in the barn. We also want to know what your biosecurity considerations are for your premises. We need to know where you want us to park and where we're going to meet the owner to conduct that first interview on the farm, or the manager of the birds. Also, where's the controlled and restricted access zones, and do you have any other special considerations that we need to put in place when we come to your farm? We need to know if you've got restraint equipment, so cages, catching pens, things like that. If they're in cages already, well, that's great. They're easy to catch, kind of. But if they're running free in the barn, it can be more difficult. We also want to know if there's any movements that are pending. Because if, say, you need to ship eggs, or there's, feed coming, all those things, because we don't want people to inadvertently come on the farm and move off the farm and take the virus with them. So just a synopsis slide here of biosecurity. The bioexclusion is where we're keeping things off the premises. The biomanagement is where we're keeping things from moving from one barn to another. When we come with a suspicion, we don't know for sure that that high path AI is there. So we don't want to move other diseases around either. And then there's the biocontainment, which is that if it is there, we don't want to move it off the farm. And so that's where the biocontainment piece comes in. So this is some of the things that you might see if someone comes onto your farm to do an investigation. Is the little blue people will be there. This is the standard sort of biosecurity or personal protective equipment that people will wear. Because avian influenza has the potential for zoonosis, people will always wear eye protection and respiratory protection, as well as the double layers of coveralls to ensure that we can safely exit the premises without taking it with us. You may see them set up a little tarp like this that's got, you can see the little orange line there, and basically one side of the line is clean, the other side is our warm zone or not clean. And just a reminder that we will always respect the premises biosecurity protocols when we're on that farm. The other thing that's going to occur right away is movement control. So access to the premises is controlled while we're doing the investigation until the risk of disease transmission is known, or at least until we have a better understanding of it. So that means that we will secure all entry exit points and ensure that neither susceptible animals nor potentially contaminated things leave or enter the premises. And so it might be an inconvenience if the feed truck is already there, but when you look at it from the perspective of the entire industry, it's an extremely important piece to put in place. People are allowed to leave the premises, but their clothes and car must not leave without being cleaned and disinfected. So you can go to the house, change clothes, but you're not allowed to leave the premises with what you were wearing in the barn. So the other thing that we will do, and I alluded to this earlier, was the epidemiology part, is what information is needed. So this is just that checklist of things that they will be asking you, and they may have asked you about them when they were on the phone with you. And then when the person doing the epidemiology gets to the farm, they will make sure that they're going to be looking at those mortality, production, feed water records. They might, if you've got other laboratory reports from recent submissions to the laboratory, looking at those, they'd want that detailed description of the farm, the feed movements, and this is where your premises log comes into play here, and that's the movements on and off the premises for the past 21 days. And that includes things like power, gas, and other service industry. It's not just those that were directly related to what was in your going into your barn, but anybody that came on that might have been in or around your barns needs to be looked at. So the visitor logs and the movement logs are extremely important for being able to determine the source and the spread perhaps of this virus if it's there. So the other thing that we also like to get, if they're not already involved, is the contact information for the farm veterinarian. So those are things that you need to keep in mind, that they need to be ready to go. And certainly under the stress that we will be under, if you have the suspicion and CFIA is coming out to do an investigation, then having these things in a readily accessible place just takes a little bit of stress off there. Move this out of the way here. So once that clinical assessment is done, the diagnostics person is going to go in and examine the animals, and then in conjunction with the person who collected all that epidemiological information, they're going to make an assessment as to whether or not this virus may be on the premises. So if it's deemed that this isn't suggestive of avian influenza, then everything's good, no samples are collected, we go home, and then you would follow it up with your private practitioner to ensure that, well, what is going on with my flock? If it's low risk, it means that there are signs that could be consistent with avian influenza, but they're not really, specific. We will deem it as low risk, and especially if that combines with the history on the farm, and they will be sent confirmatory negative. And then if it's high risk, it means that this is pretty probable that we have avian influenza here. They're submitted high risk to the lab. We submit samples for avian diseases to both the closest CASM laboratory, so this would be your Ontario lab, as well as to the National Center for Foreign Animal Disease in Winnipeg. The confirmatory testing, so this is the testing that we report internationally, must be done by a laboratory that's recognized by the OIE. And so that is the lab in Winnipeg. But the lab in Winnipeg has also done these approvals on the CASM labs. And so that's why they can do this testing as well. So I've talked before, but we control the premises while we're doing the inspection or investigation. But if we determine that this is high risk, then we will take further steps to control your premises. We will declare that your premises is an infected place. And what that does is effectively mean that nothing can leave your farm without permission. The birds and things that may be contaminated with the virus are also quarantined. And the quarantine puts more restrictions on what you can do with those birds on your farm. So this is just the two mechanisms that we have available to us to take some action immediately to control movements. And in addition to this, on suspicion, we can apply these same restrictions to premises that have had direct or indirect contact with the birds, and that we will have found through that interview with the epidemiology questionnaire, is these are high risk premises because if they've had direct contact with birds in particular, or you've moved birds to another premises, then there could be a good probability that they've moved the virus with them. The other premises that we can target here are premises with susceptible species located within a radius of up to 3 kilometers from the premises under investigation. As Kathleen said, this virus can be transmitted short distances in the right environmental conditions, and 3 kilometers is a precautionary distance. The likelihood of it traveling that far is probably very small, but we always want to act on the side of caution when we're at this stage in the investigation. It's important to remember that suspending the movement of susceptible species during the suspicion is a key factor to stopping the spread of highly infectious diseases such as high-path AI. And this is because we can't see those viruses. We don't know that they're there. So if we can stop movements until we have a better understanding of what's going on, it's critical. So owner's responsibility. So CFIA is going to take their samples and go off to send them to the lab. And you as the owner are left there with a couple of pieces of paper that say you can't move things. But there's other things that apply as well, is that you need to ensure that footwear and vehicles leaving the property have been cleaned and disinfected. You need to apply strict biosecurity measures for yourself and any employees, control the movement of people on and off the premises, and inform everybody that comes that, what these movement restrictions are and what they're for. And if at all possible, if it's not essential, they don't come on. You do have to remember, because you have those pieces of paper, that quarantine and that declaration of infected place, you will require permission from the CFIA for things to move on or off your premises. And in general, we would not allow the movement of birds on or off the premises during that period of time, but we will allow feed to come onto a farm. It's highly advised that people keep birds indoors while the quarantine and restrictions are in place, or at the very least, if it's an outdoor flock, is to make sure that your feed and water is secured and that wild birds don't have access to it. If there's a change in health status of what you're seeing, you need to report that immediately to CFIA. You need to make sure that your rodent and insect control programs are right up to date. And you need to keep dogs, cats, and other household pets confined and out of the barns. We have to remember that other species can either get the influenza virus, or they can act as a vector, basically, to move it around mechanically. So if we move to the confirmed case, and this is just one of those pictures where we have the swollen colon wattles. So this is what you might see if the birds are dying. This is when we move into the other half of this list. Is we've gone through the biosecurity, epidiagnostics, and movement control. We confirm it. And this is when we move into depopulation and destruction and disposal, which is included in depopulation, the evaluation compensation, the cleaning and disinfection, and surveillance of epidemiologically linked premises. And every time we do another investigation in the course of an outbreak, we will repeat all this up here: the biosecurity, the epi, the diagnostics, and the movement control. This will be repeated again. This is what it might look like if you have a confirmed positive premises, is that the entire access to the premises is controlled. This here is a tent to shelter responders from, and actually was acting as a that between the warm zone and the cold zone type of thing. So it will look a little different than what it did on the day when people came to do the investigation. For epidemiology, their work isn't done. We will really dig into the tracing activities. So this is where we're going to be gathering that information on when the virus was potentially introduced, where the virus may have come from. So what was the source, where the virus is and where it is not present on the premises. That can give us an indication of how long it's been there and how it's spread within that premises, and give us clues to how it might spread to other premises. And when the virus may have been spread from the premises. And the inability to quickly trace the movements of birds, people, and contaminated things may have significant impact on the size and duration of the outbreak. Or again, it's why it's really important that as a producer, you have your farm records as far as movement logs, people movements, things like that, readily at hand, so that it becomes something that can be done very quickly, as opposed to spending days trying to figure out who came on when. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about control zones here, because we actually have two types of control zones that we use within the CFIA. And this first one is maybe what in Ontario you are more familiar with, because it is what was used in 2015. But essentially, this is an interim zone, and it's established really when we start applying those quarantines and declarations of infected place to the premises that are within that 3 kilometers, and that would create an infected zone, as well as premises with susceptible species located between 3 and 10 kilometers, and that creates what we call a restricted zone. So under the authorities that the Act has, we have that ability to stretch further than that 3 kilometers to start monitoring premises and looking for that disease, because we know that the virus is present in one place and we want to make sure that it hasn't been spread. With this type of control zone, a license is required for movement of animals, animal products, and related materials and things off these premises. If we were to allow you to move something onto the premises, it would end up under the same restrictions once it gets onto the premises, everything else that's on that farm. So this is a picture just representing what a avian influenza control zone looks like. So in the center here, we have the infected premises. And then we have, say, epi-linked premises. These are ones that have had, they're either within that 3 kilometers. So they're all in this little circle. And then out here in this outer orange ring, we have the monitored premises. So these are the ones that would exist between 3 and that 10 kilometers from the outer limit of the infected zone. We can also have some epi-linked premises that are contacts that are outside of this zone. They're ones that maybe something moved to, a week before. So we will monitor those as well, but they don't fall within the zone. So the second type of control zone that we have is what we call a primary control zone. This one has a couple of things that are very significant to us. One is that it's applied, movement restrictions are applied on a broad scale to control movements in, out, within, and through a geographically defined area where the disease is considered to be present. So it gives us a lot more control over what's moving and where it's moving. So the zone is comprised of an inner 3 kilometer radius zone, and that was that infected zone, and an outer 10 kilometer radius restricted zone. So these are minimums, and this is not only used in Canada, this is what our trading partners use as well. And so it becomes important for us to be able to communicate really clearly to them how we are, what actions we're taking. So these two figures here, we might end up having a restricted zone that maybe is bigger than this, depending on what we're finding. But as a minimum, it would be 10 kilometers. There is an option to put in a security zone, which extends beyond that outer limits of the restricted zone, in which we would do surveillance as well. And in this situation, a permit is required for all movements of designated animals, products, or things. So this would be poultry products, poultry byproducts, and anything that could potentially be contaminated by this virus, and industry-related traffic. So that's your service providers, your feed trucks, etc., into, out of, through, and within the zone. And it's not just for movements on and off individual premises. So this type of control can be critical in preventing further transmission of the virus via industry-related movements, not just movements that happen to occur on your farm. And the other very important piece of this is that this broad-scale approach to controlling movements has the most implications for and recognition for international trade. So by demonstrating this type of zone to, say, the United States, they can then decide that, say, this area in Ontario that is under this, say, primary control zone, that's the only place they're going to restrict movements from. Other places in Ontario can continue to export to the States or to other countries. So that there is an important difference between the zones, and that would be probably the most significant for your perspective. So this is just the picture here. We don't bother putting the little premises in here. These are just the zones, and the restrictions in the infected zone are more severe or restrictive than they would be in the restricted zone. You might have less biosecurity requirements in that zone. So with that confirmation will come the order to destroy or to depopulate. So there are things that we keep in mind with depopulation, and certainly there's the animal factor. The killing must be carried out quickly and humanely. And there are both provincial and international animal welfare requirements that must be met here. CFIA ourselves does not actually have that legislative authority that lies with the province. But in working collaboratively with the province, any of the procedures that we have come up with would meet the requirements for animal welfare. There's the human factors. The health and safety of responders must always be a key here as well. We can't endanger human lives in the course of taking these actions. And then there is the disease control factors, biosecurity, environmental issues, and environmental issues are very important when it comes to what's happening with the carcasses and what's happening with the disinfectants and things like that we're using. So for the first detection, the requirement to dispose of a flock will be issued when high pathogenicity avian influenza is confirmed by NCFAD. And usually that can be, there might be a day or so lag in that one. However, with the situation that we currently have is that detections in a related geographical area, when clinical signs are consistent with high path AI, the flocks may be ordered destroyed based on a non-negative H5 or H7 in other cases, a PCR test from the CASM laboratory. So the methods that we have available to us, and I mean, there's not lots of them, but certainly whole barn gas flooding is what we have used almost exclusively in Canada, and it is our preferred method for large flocks. But there are different methods that can be used for different situations, including cervical dislocation, the captive bolt or the Zephyr, the modified atmosphere chambers, which would be similar to whole barn gas flooding, the head-only electrocution, lethal injection, and free bullets. So they're available, but as I say, we tend to go with the whole barn gas flooding in Canada. Depopulation also includes disposal considerations, and so certainly we look at the method, the capacity, environmental concerns, and public perception. So all of these things have to be considered in making those decisions. And again, it's always good of a preparedness plan to know what you're going to do ahead of time. So the disposal methods, again, there's a big role for provincial and municipal governments here. That's a lot of that environmental concerns resides within their legislative authority. And from CFIA, our perspectives, we look at the method must not result in spread of the virus. So some methods that we have available, certainly burial, landfill, composting, and in-barn composting is our preferred method if we can, or the next to be composting just outside the barns, but certainly, landfill and burial can be options as well. We don't have as much capacity for incineration and rendering or alkaline hydrolysis in Canada, but they certainly could be considered. Evaluation and compensation will happen very quickly as soon as that order to destroy is given. And as I mentioned earlier, that the provisions under the Health of Animals Act for compensation is paid for animals and things ordered destroyed. And it's kind of based on market value, but in the poultry industry and to some extent in swine, compensation models have been developed. And of course, those are done working in a consultation with the national poultry industries. And important, compensation is not paid for lost production. And that's really where you may have those accessibility to AgriStability and some of the provincial programs. Cleaning and disinfection, we've already heard this too, is that it is, the costs are borne by the owner, but for every place or thing ordered to be cleaned and disinfected, the objective is to mitigate the risk of further spread of the infective agent. So this is a big part in the puzzle of controlling this disease. And before we can restock a barn, the C&D has to have been approved by CFIA, because that's part of our process for being able to declare our country freedom again. That's the last slide.
Excellent. Okay, so we got a lot of questions we're going to run through. A couple of questions about PI and coverage for C&D, which we've already talked about before. So answer to that one is talk to your board as to what is covered beyond the indemnity that CFI puts in. Let's see, for sites that contain machinery, fuel for cash cropping, could this require, or could this equipment face restrictions? I'm guessing no.
There would be an assessment done to see, if it's possible that equipment is it contaminated? If it's contaminated, then how would we clean it for you to be able to use it? And because it's such a different industry, often there aren't very many restrictions that are placed on it, but it's certainly to get it on and off the premises, it would require that it be inspected and permitted off.
I know we had discussions back in 2015 about things like certified crop advisors coming on to your farm to do inspections that they could be potential purveyors of disease. Okay, Dan's got a question about, is there a preferred disinfectant for avian influenza?
No, there are many that will work, and as Kathleen had said, just the nature of the virus means that it will, there are many disinfectants that work. We do tend to use things like Virkon and Prevail, but chlorine will work. There's any number. What we recommend people do is you read the information, the product description, and it will tell you if it's effective against avian influenza. I would say that most of the common disinfectants and detergents used within the poultry industry are likely going to be effective.
Another question about, will the presentation slides be shared? So the recording will be on the PIC website. We'll have to get back to you as to whether slides can be shared or not, but the recording will be. Next question, how long can a virus survive outside of the host, for example, on someone's shoes or some other vector?
That will be dependent on temperature, whether that virus is protected by fecal material or other matter. So it doesn't survive for really long times at normal room temperature, but the best thing is you remove all the organic material, you disinfect it, and you're probably good to go.
Right. Okay, next question. There's a hatchery within the 10K zone. What effect will this have for the hatchery? So I'm assuming for product going out of the hatchery outside the 10K zone.
Okay, so these are generally they're controlled with those permits, what you permit to go in and what you permit to go out. And we look at what risks are associated with that hatchery, but certainly we know that, and Kathleen had alluded to this as well, that if virus does get into the egg, the embryo is almost always killed for a high path influenza. So the risk of spread from a hatchery is actually pretty small. So again, that goes back to those assessments done for each and every case. And I'll go back to Greg's reply here, is that for the individual case, you would need to go back to the permitting group because they know all the details of the outbreak.
Excellent. Okay, we have a question about a road being a boundary of a zone. Can it be used to deliver poults to a farm just outside the zone? So can we run right along the boundary to move product?
As long as you're running along the boundary, you wouldn't need a permit as long as you didn't go through the zone to get to that road. But if you had to go through the zone to get to the road, then you would need a permit to have gone through the zone.
Yeah, so burn a bit of extra diesel to go around. What are the restrictions or requirements for moving hatching like baby chicks into the restricted zone? I think we've already discussed that a little bit with the Featherboard Command Center, that they're trying to not put chicks into the zone. I've always used an example. I've always used an example of, you don't run to a fire with gasoline, right? And that's kind of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, ideally you would not fill barns, because what that does is put more birds at risk of being infected. But you'd have to remember, if they do go into the zone, they take on all the requirements that are applied to everything in the zone. They don't get a free pass. They are subjected to surveillance and all that testing that goes on within the zone.
Yeah, so those birds will, I guess they can go in. It's not recommended, but you'll be permitting them to get in, and then everything else that goes with it. Okay.
Yeah.
Highway 401, Highway 401, the infamous 401 highway runs through the Zone 2 restrictive area. I think people are assuming that this is what's going to happen for IP2. Will the highway be exempt? I can answer that question. I'm going to say no.
And anything that is moving, poultry-related products or things, is not exempt.
Yep.
It's that they would have to have a permit.
Another question, how long after a confirmed case will the barn be cleared to get a new flock? So I guess we start from, we have a problem today, and then we're going to go through all the process. So it's depopulation, heat treatment, cleaning and disinfection, the waiting period, and then the new flock. So how many, I guess, can you walk us through that real quick?
Yeah, so I mean, on average, we kind of think somewhere between 7 and 10 days to have like you have your depopulation, then you build your compost if you're doing on-farm composting, and you may be between 5 and 10 days to get the appropriate heat in there. Then you've got to clean and disinfect. So it depends, is this a laying barn, like a table leg barn, or a broiler barn? Because broiler barns are easier to clean than cage layers. So you could be looking at a few days to clean versus a few weeks to clean. So it's there's a lot of factors that go into determining how long it's going to take before you can put a flock in.
Yep, and I think with that, we've had issues where barns have been cleaned multiple times before CFIA is signed off. So that adds to that. And then after that, was it 21 days before we get our, after the sign off, and then is it 3 weeks and then we can put chicks back in?
It will depend on the situation, but with the new changes to the OIE code, that within flock incubation period is 14 days, so that we often with high path viruses like this, that incubation period at the individual bird level is pretty short, like maybe 2 to 3 days, and so you're within flock incubation period of 14 days is really what we would be looking at now. There are some situations where we would continue to use 21 days, but it's based on the situation as it's playing out. Right.
So we got some questions about in-barn composting. How is that best achieved? I guess does it come down to the fact, will there be, like, who will guide that in-barn composting? And maybe we even talk about what happens if we have a cage layer barn. How would that happen?
Yeah, so the in-barn composting, often it's a contractor that comes in to build the piles, although producers can build it themselves as well, but it's all done under the supervision and working in conjunction with people from CFIA because we have to monitor those piles to make sure that they are going to heat properly, because that is critical. It's to make sure that we have heated them enough that we inactivate the virus that's there.
Okay. We do have a question about foot baths. Are they effective? Are they not? Should we be using foot baths? Should we not?
Well, my personal preference is not, unless you're changing that foot bath very, very, very regularly and there's no organic material in it. The disinfectant just really doesn't hold up for long to environmental conditions, especially if they're outside, or to organic load.
Yeah, and I think it's also a function of contact time too. If you look at the disinfectant, contact time is probably a lot longer than the little dip that we do going in and out.
You need to stand there for 5 or 10 minutes before you can go anywhere.
Yeah, there is a question about permitting, but Greg's answering that one. And I think the question really comes back down to following the movement control line at that point and figuring out where we go from there. Okay. That was pretty intense, Sandra. Thank you very much. That was great. I think we've run through the questions for this. I want to keep moving, looking at time. You guys are spending, I appreciate you guys spending time with us. I'd like to introduce Dr. Brian Stevens. He's going to talk to us about the real reason why we're all here is our challenge with wild birds and why they're moving, and actually some of the things that we would like you to do to help us do some surveillance on the wild bird side. So Dr. Brian Stevens is with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. He's one of the epidemiologists there. Brian and I talk on a semi-frequent basis about many things wild bird, and Brian, you are good to go.
Perfect. Thanks, Al. So I'm going to talk about wild birds today and about the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. So I'm going to start with who we are. So we're a nonprofit organization. We're across Canada. We're composed of biologists, researchers, and pathologists like myself. And what we do is mostly wildlife disease surveillance. We also do a little bit of research and outreach, but the wildlife disease surveillance is really what we are meant to do and what we get a lot of our funding for. And we work with a lot of governmental agencies to help enact policy change, as well as coordinate responses when we do have certain viruses that pop up in the wildlife. Just to give you an idea as to where we are across Canada, so we do cover the entirety of the nation. Our center is located at the University of Guelph, and we do work alongside the Animal Health Lab. We work in the same building with them, and we work with their pathologists and lab technicians as they process cases for us. And our coverage is Ontario as well as Nunavut. And you can see that we do have nodes across the country. So that's basically just what we are as an organization. And what I wanted to mention, we'll get into this a little bit later on in the talk, is that anytime anybody does see a dead or sick wild animal, they're encouraged to contact us. And we've got a few ways to contact us. We've got an online reporting tool, as well as a toll-free number and an email address that people can send us information that they're finding. But definitely, if you do have an animal that you find dead on your property or you find somewhere, definitely contact us about it. There is no charge for submitting cases to us. If we deem it acceptable for our caseload, then we will bring that animal in, and we cover all the costs for that. So there's no concern on the cost side of things. So getting into wildlife disease surveillance. So a lot of people often ask, why do we care about wildlife? Why do we want to know what's going on in wildlife? And why does it matter what's going on with the diseases that are circulating in those populations? And the main answer to that is the concept of One Health. And I think that's something that people have started to realize over the past few years, is that if you get a disease in one group of species, we're starting to learn that it affects all the other groups of species as well as the environment. So if we look at avian influenza, we discuss it as an agricultural disease, but we need to know that it's often carried in wildlife. So a lot of waterfowl will carry this virus. And it can be transmitted from waterfowl and other wild birds into agricultural species such as poultry and swine. And swine is actually a big one because they're a good mixing pot for these influenza viruses. And as was mentioned by others, humans are involved in this. We have our own influenza viruses, and those can also be passed into our agricultural species and potentially into wildlife as well. So a lot of these viruses are kind of circulating between all of these groups, and we're getting recombinations and reassortments of this virus, and that's when we get new influenza viruses popping up. So we do see a lot of that going on throughout the wild, throughout agriculture, and throughout human health. And the other virus that we've seen this a lot with is COVID-19, where we think of that as a human-based virus, but we have seen it moving into different species. Not as much in the agricultural sector, but we do have mink farms out there, and it does affect mink farms quite a bit. Mink are quite susceptible to COVID-19. Then we have seen it in wildlife as well. There's been a lot of reports recently of white-tailed deer that are infected with the virus that causes COVID-19. So we are seeing more of that One Health aspect where viruses are moving between species, and we need to kind of learn more about them and learn what the effects are of that movement between species. Are we getting different variants? Are we getting new viruses being formed when that's happening? And what kind of danger is it to agricultural species, humans, and wildlife? The other reason that we want to look at wildlife disease surveillance is really just to monitor diseases in these populations to assist with population management. So there are a lot of governmental agencies that are working on population management, and they want to know what's going on with these species and what types of viruses and other infectious agents could be affecting these populations long term. And then we also want to figure out what's going on so that we can coordinate some sort of response with our partners in government. This was talked about a little bit earlier, but just to give a brief look at the flyways. So we have the four main flyways throughout North America, and you can see most of the viruses that most of the cases of this virus have been reported in the Atlantic flyway. And you can see all these black dots that start to move into Ontario and across into the mid West US, and that's not a big surprise as to why we're starting to see the H5N1 virus start to move in some of these places. And this map over on the right here just shows you where birds are coming from when they're going to North and South Carolina. So North and South Carolina were one of the earliest places that we picked up this virus in our wild populations. And you can see over the decades, this is based on banding of ducks, and you can see where all of these ducks were moving from the Carolinas. And you can see that Ontario is one of the darker, and that's because a lot of these ducks were moving between Ontario and the Carolinas during their normal migration routes. So it shouldn't be a big surprise that we're now starting to see cases of this in Ontario. This map was showed earlier by Lucy, and you can see just where we've seen the virus so far, mostly along the East Coast, but it's starting to move inland over the past few weeks. And you can see Ontario here with a single dot, and I'll talk about that in a minute, as well as a few other suspicious cases that we have in the province. So if you're interested in what's going on in wildlife, if you go to our website, CWHC website, and you click on the avian influenza and look at our ongoing reports, we do have a bi-weekly report that we put up about the avian influenza results that we have. So this is from the March 22nd report, so last week, and you can see in the 2 weeks prior in Ontario, we had tested 17 birds. 2 were influenza A positive and 2 were H5 positive. At that point when this report was put up, none of those were confirmed as the highly pathogenic strain. So we do have a few steps before we can confirm it. So these are all just preliminary results because it is possible for you to have an H5 positive bird that doesn't end up being a highly pathogenic strain of the virus. It could be a low pathogenic strain as well. So just take that with a grain of salt, that not all of these cases necessarily mean that it's going to be the H5N1 that we're worried about. And I just mentioned that because the map I'm going to show now is going to put a few different points on there, which some of these are suspect cases, as we only have 1 confirmed case here in Ontario at the moment. And the confirmed cases here in New Hamburg, that was a red-tailed hawk that was found having neurological symptoms and was euthanized and sent to us for testing. And we were able to get a sample from it, and it was confirmed by the Foreign Animal Disease Laboratory in Winnipeg as a H5N1 Eurasian strain of the highly pathogenic strain of avian influenza. We also have a few other suspicious cases, and I only mention these even though they haven't been confirmed yet, because I want to at least show you that we are getting suspect cases across the province right now. And what we are deeming as suspect cases are cases that are in susceptible species, and I'll talk about what those are in a minute, that are showing clinical signs consistent with avian influenza in wild birds. And some of these will have had some preliminary laboratory results as well that are suspicious for a highly pathogenic strain of avian influenza. So we have the New Hamburg case there, but we've also had suspicious cases out in Point Pelee, in Kingston, and in Ottawa. So right now we are suspicious that this virus is likely spread far across the province at this time. So the species that are most susceptible to this virus are the water birds. So we're speaking of the waterfowl, such as our ducks and geese, as well as shorebirds like our gulls. And we have heard of cases in Canada geese and different gull species across North America. Raptors appear to be quite susceptible to this virus as well. There have been a number of cases in many different species of raptors. So red-tailed hawk, I already mentioned as our main confirmed case here. But I've heard of other species such as owls and bald eagles in different parts of North America that have died from this virus. And then we have started to see it in some of our corvids and other scavengers as well. So crows and ravens in particular, but there have been a couple blue jay cases as well in different areas. So we do have a few other species that we don't typically think of with these types of viruses. Typically when we think of avian influenza viruses, we're thinking about the water birds more than anything else, in particular our ducks and geese, but we're starting to see it move into other wild species with this particular virus. And typically what we're seeing on the wildlife side is neurological signs. So these are birds that are having difficulty standing, walking, or flying. They often have abnormal behavior and head movements, and sometimes they will have convulsions and seizures. And because this is wildlife, we often see many birds that die suddenly with no clinical signs prior to death. Some of that is because we're not out there and able to witness the signs prior to death, or they're very subtle and we're not close enough to pick up on them. And some of them, I think this virus is just so severe that they die before they actually start to show any clinical signs. So what you can do to help us to track where this virus is across the province is to look at starting to submit any dead birds that you find either on your properties or in your general area, and definitely report them to us if you do see any of these birds. So I've already mentioned the three major groups, the water birds, so waterfowl and shorebirds, as well as any raptors, and then scavengers like crows and ravens. But in addition to that, also I want to mention that any bird species could potentially become infected with this. They are definitely not as susceptible when it comes to songbirds and other species in those categories, but we will see it occasionally. And if we look at the cases that are in Europe, they have detected it rarely in some of these species. So some sparrow species, some pigeon species have been dying from avian influenza in the European region. So in addition to those major groups, any die-off of more than 2 individuals of any bird species, we would say definitely contact us about it. And any bird that's showing neurological signs, that's the main thing that we're seeing with these wild birds. So definitely we do want to hear about that. So if you do witness any of this, then definitely please contact us. So again, here's our online reporting tool that you can go to, our phone number and our email address. And as I mentioned, there's no charge for any of this. So all you will do is call us or email us, and we will speak to you about whether or not we can bring in a bird and perform the necessary testing to see if we can figure out where this virus has been spreading across the province. And I'm happy to answer any questions when it comes to wild bird species at this time.
Thank you, Brad. I don't think we have any questions yet in thing, but I did want to ask you a couple of questions about things like wild bird die-offs. Have we seen that? Are we seeing other things? Oh, we got a few questions coming through. So how about you answer about the wild bird die-offs, and we'll open to some of the other questions.
So yeah, so in Ontario, we haven't seen any confirmed die-offs related to avian influenza yet, but there are other places in North America where there have been suspected die-offs related to it. So there have been some duck species that I know that there have been concerns for it. I've heard of snow geese that there are concerns that there could have been some die-offs related to avian influenza. But a lot of this is still very early on in North America, so we don't have all the information at this time, but it seems like there are going to be some die-offs in our wild species going forward.
Right. Question about the indestructible bird we have in Ontario, the turkey vultures. Is that one that we should be concerned about?
Yes. So there have been confirmed cases in turkey vultures in different parts of North America. It is definitely a species that is susceptible to this virus.
Great. Question about whether this is the same as COVID vaccines. This is not COVID. This is not a coronavirus. This is avian influenza. Question about a wild turkey you might find in a ditch. And I know it's going to be a bit of a challenge because not much stays dead long outside, but yeah, anything that you can report, I'm sure you would like to report.
Yeah, so if you can report it, and then we can determine whether it will be useful for us. So we do definitely want to hear about anything that's happening out there. And if you do find a wild turkey that's dead in a ditch that appears to be scavenged on, we may not necessarily bring that bird in, but at least report it to us and we can kind of discuss with you whether or not it's something that we want to bring in.
Yeah. Question about what we're dealing with in terms of, let's see. Oh, actually, just in terms of testing. Let's see this. Oh, yes. How accurate is your testing for avian influenza? If it's a positive, is it positive for sure, or do we get false negatives? Like, how is your testing as far as when it comes to what we do at the lab?
So it would be the exact same as what's happening in the poultry industry. I don't have these specifics on how accurate the PCR is with false positives versus false negatives. But it is something where we would be doing the exact same testing that's being done at the Animal Health Lab and by the CFIA, where it is going to be a PCR will be performed first, and if it is suspicious, then it will be sent to the Center for Foreign Animal Disease in Winnipeg for confirmation testing.
Great. I was going to ask you, Brian, can I show a bit of footage about what neurological disorder looks like in a bird? I actually have a video here. This has been circulating on Facebook. It's snow goose and from North Dakota. So let me just play this. And you'll see, there you go. So
yeah, so that abnormal head movement is something that's been reported in a lot of these cases, where they're just they're not able to, because if this was a normal goose, it would have gotten up and moved away. So it probably is having trouble walking, flying, and it has that very abnormal head movement. So that's what's been reported to us with a lot of these birds as well.
Right on. Okay, with that I think that covers off our questions for you, Brian. Any other last thoughts about the migration or what to expect? When does it end? And I'll throw that open to Chris Sharp. Chris is here with us from Canadian Wildlife Health Services also. Last thoughts before we call it. I think at this point it's 9 o'clock and we're already at a lot longer than I thought we were going to be. Our last speaker was supposed to be Dan Ward, but I think he was going to talk about disposal options. And I think what we'll do is we'll leave Dan for another different talk or update later on. There's Chris. Chris, any thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, just in regards to migration, migration has been in full swing. This little bit of cold weather probably has slowed things down, and there's a lot of still winter weather north of us. So I would anticipate that new birds will still be arriving in the coming weeks and sticking around for a little while. So it's not the time to let your guard down as poultry producers, and just be vigilant. As has been, just to echo what's been said earlier in the presentations tonight, remove any attractants that could be attracting wild birds to your property. That includes feed or water or carcasses, and just be very vigilant with your biosecurity. The virus is likely all around within Southern Ontario, and it's important to be careful.
I'm thinking of all our farms that have ponds on them, everything from, Nova Scotia has removed bird feeders, or they've recommended to take bird feeders down. Lots going on. There's a lot of citizen science going on too. It's our folks that are part of the bird watching community are helping us. So reporting is extremely important, and I think Brian and Christopher have really shown that. So
yeah, I just want to jump in for 1 second. So yeah, I just want to mention, based on what they've seen out of Europe, with this being an influenza virus, it's definitely going to be more prevalent in the fall, winter, and spring. But they noticed last year that it did still seem to be spreading throughout the summer. So cases were much lower in the summer throughout Europe. But just because we do get to the warm weather and migration goes away, it's possible that this virus will stick around. So I'd say definitely keep vigilant throughout the summer and keep reporting any wild bird cases so we can hopefully continue to monitor where this virus is throughout the year.
Great. Well, thanks again, Brian. And I'll just a reminder for the folks that might be doing small flock stuff, or if you're a feed dealer or anyone associated with the small flock industry, we will be having an update for the small flock folks again tomorrow night. This recording will be posted on the PIC website, poultryindustrycouncil.ca, probably by tomorrow or the day after. And as far as any further updates, look toward your Featherboard Command Center, OMAFRA, and CFIA. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you for spending an evening with us. This is not exactly how we wanted to pull something together like this, but we'll try to keep our updates relevant and coming to you guys as needed. So with that, everyone have a great night, stay safe, and keep your birds healthy.